We're doing a bit of an ad hoc this morning because we felt that the action that the CTA is taking and the actions that we are doing probably feed better into for you guys to understand where the market is likely to go. But there is a very important legal aspect to the whole novel foods thing. What I'm going to do is I think it's important that Damien gives you an overview on novel foods and why the FSA are supposedly taking this action, but also the truth behind it and what is going to happen over the next couple of weeks. Because this isn't something that is going to happen over the next couple of weeks, not a couple of months, not a couple of years. This is a next week, the week after issue. Damien.
Thanks, Mike. So, yeah, I've got a presentation that was up to date on Friday, but I've since had a few meetings here, and there's quite a bit that's gone on since then. So, hence Mike's going to chip in throughout the presentation, I imagine. So I'm Damien Bove, I'm the Chief Medical Officer of Adact Medical. And Adact Medical is a medical compliance company. We've worked in pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, medical devices, herbal medicines, food supplements since 2004 in various forms. We got involved in electronic cigarettes in 2007, launching a TPD compliance service that became the biggest in Europe. It was in 2017. I'm not sure if it still is, but and we did work on CBD product development, formulation back in late 2013 for a product that launched early 2014. So we've had a long history in CBD, and we now offer a whole package of compliance services for CBD and hemp companies, from testing to supply chain advice and packaging and all sorts of areas. But today, obviously, we're more interested in novel foods and all the things that have been going on in that area. So I'll first summarise the old situation back in the day. So this is all the way back to December 2018. It was generally accepted that whole plant extracts were not novel. So if you were making edibles, as long as you had a whole plant extract, you were fine. And there was some discussion around potentially a maximum level of 15% CBD, but it was never formal or official. That was just what people talked about. And it was generally agreed that isolate couldn't be used in food, any of the cannabinoids in isolation, because they were novel. And that's generally how people worked. And it was the medical claims that were the industry's biggest challenge, and that's where we focused a lot on. People making medical claims, quasi-medical claims, which, because of the nature of CBD, are just not tolerated at all. And in terms of commercial and promotional advice, that was the strength of the area. It was all about how companies were presenting their products. And at the time, what was going to happen next was the EFSA conducting a review into hemp extracts and isolates for the basis of their novelty. Regional agencies were feeding into that review, but whole hemp extracts were regarded as not being novel, and they'd come out and they'd published statements to that effect. There was sufficient evidence of their widespread use prior to the 1997 cut-offs and things like that. And the business was growing and growing fast. Then, in January 2019, there was a change to the novel food catalogue. I had a conversation with Mike on the Friday where he highlighted that the catalogue had changed. This was the update I've detailed here. I'm not going to read it out because I'll bore you. But fundamentally, they changed it to say that any hemp extract should be reviewed for novelty. So the change happened and nobody really noticed it. There were some discussions with those in the know going on. And then the good old Daily Mail went to press. I was in South America at the time, and I received 10,000 phone calls, maybe an exaggeration. And obviously the whole world went mad at that point. everyone assumed that CBD and the hemp industry had been closed down overnight. But that was not the case. The CTA launched into action. Perhaps you want to give a bit of brief what you did there, Mike?
Yeah, basically, before the afternoon that the novel foods catalogue was changed, Sante, the body that actually administered the novel foods catalogue, called me and said we're very concerned about what the novel foods working group are doing. We consider their change at this point in time to be unlawful. We are the administrators of the novel foods list. However, we cannot influence what the working group decide to do. At that point in time, I was personally invited to go to the next working group meeting, which is in a week or so's time, in Brussels, which is where we are today. So we previously had a very, very, very good relationship with the Novel Foods Group in the UK. It was an excellent relationship until the head of Novel Foods was moved sideways and into a different department. Thanks in part to some of the information that she put out, which was very pro-CBD and extracts in general. So that's where we got involved. I think we saw about 6,500 phone calls over that few short days. I think about 11,000 emails, which when you're a team of 8 is still pretty unmanageable. I think we probably answered about 30% of those emails. But we also immediately took on legal advice. Our legal counsel is here somewhere. And following on from that, we've now instructed a QC, a guy by the name of Jonathan Kirk, who's very well respected in the foods industry as one of the leading QCs in Europe, to actually help us with the FSA on Monday and the EFSA a week on Tuesday. So that's where we are at this present moment in time. Legally, the whole issue around novel foods is very, very, very weak from the FSA, and that is what is being said all around Europe. That's what our QC says. That's what our council says. So our advice to anyone selling CBD products at this moment in time is don't panic. There isn't an awful lot can be done. The CTA have received notification of 3 individual stops. 2 members up in the northeast of England. Within hours of those being issued, the CTA was on the phone to Trading Standards. Those stop notices were stopped and companies were allowed to continue to trade. One company in the southeast of England, very, very, very new company, literally been open 4 weeks, changed their product line to comply on the full understanding that in the next couple of weeks, once we get some clarity on this, that they will restock those original products and they will go back to stocking those products, because if we issue a legal challenge, they will become the test case for all of Europe, and that's where those guys stand at the moment. So, Damien, do you want to carry on with your novel foods and the legality?
Yep, thanks, Mike. So, as well as the CTA, the Herbal Food Manufacturers Association launched into action as well. Those of you on social media will have seen several Facebook groups springing up to deal with this particular issue, sharing evidence and sharing opinions, and often inaccurate opinions, but sharing them anyway. The Food Standards Agency, by all accounts, got bombarded with meeting requests from left, right and centre. So that all happened very quickly. So I was originally going to be stood up here talking about supply chain evaluation until this all kicked off. So we quickly changed the presentation over. During the week, I was looking to compile all the different opinions and the different strategies and the different reasons why this change in the novel foods registration was wrong, and what people could do about it. But then there's actually been a couple of publications in the past week or so that summarise the situation nicely. The HFMA have published some pieces. Obviously the CTA have done a lot of work and sent a lot of information out, about 5,000 pages, isn't it, Mike? And there's a really good summary article on the British Cannabis website that's really worth a read, that was published last week as well. So, so that made my job as a presenter a lot easier because somebody had already summarised it all. So I'm going to just bounce through. I'm not going to go into the minutiae of the arguments because it's quite dry, but I'll just bounce through what the key points are. Was the change in the catalogue legal? Probably not, but that's for the people in court to decide. But the key points were there's been a serious lack of consultation before this change was made, in breach of their published guidelines on how to operate. So the changes don't appear to have been done within their own guidelines. That's the first key point. The second key point was these products were in print as not novel a few weeks ago, and now they're novel. And unfortunately, the logic doesn't flow in that direction. You can move from novel to not novel, but you can't really move from not in the other way around. You just can't do it. The logic doesn't flow. So unless the evidence that they based their original opinions on was fake, which is highly unlikely, there's no logical reason why they should be able to suddenly change their opinion on it. Again, there was irregularities how this amendment came about. To make a change to a catalogue entry whilst the product is still undergoing a category review is not the way it should be done, unless there's a serious safety issue that's come to light. As there's been no safety issue with CBD or hemp products, to step outside of that formal review process and make an arbitrary change to the catalogue is extremely unusual, and again outside of their normal guidelines and working. But the key important point is publishing in the catalogue is not a legally binding opinion. It's merely a guidance for the local authorities to review products. So that change in the catalogue does not mean you cannot sell hemp products, CBD products. It means that those products should be reviewed for novelty. And that's an important point. And products should be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. There's no rule under these regulations for blanket assessments across categories. There is also some case being made that isolates in in foods that were on the market before the 1st of January are not novel. It's quite a dry technical piece, but if you want to look in the British Cannabis document, there's a good summary of it in there, but I'm not going to go into it now. And then it comes on to the other point. Even if they decide to review it, are hemp products and extracts novel? And the answer is simply no. As we said before, earlier entries and earlier published opinions by the Food Standards Agency and other agencies around Europe said that there was sufficient evidence that these products were not novel. So how did they suddenly become novel? Also, the point is that just because these products are extracted in itself does not make them novel. The fundamentals is the molecular structure of the cannabinoids has not changed. Those cannabinoids have been in food, they've been consumed widely right across the planet for generations. The fact that they're extracted does not alter that. They are simply the same molecules, just presented differently. That does not constitute a novel food under the regulation. Manufacturing processes do not is irrelevant to the food being novel or not, unless those processes introduce an issue of safety. So if there's something in that process that makes the products unsafe, then it enters the area of novelty. If it doesn't, then it doesn't impact on the novelty. And also, these manufacturing methods themselves are not novel. CO2 extraction has been used for making flavourings for the beer industry for decades. Ethanol extraction has been used for food supplements and food products, again, for generations. And distillation, as of course we all know, we've all had gin, it's centuries old. There's nothing novel here at all. So there's no basis on which to make these products out to be novel under the regulation and how the regulations are laid out. So did you want to talk about a little bit on bioenforcement, Mike?
Yep. Okay, so as I alluded to earlier on, we've had issues with stop notices with the CTA. Technically, any council that offers a stop notice on a trader would have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that a product is novel, which they can't do. The FSA's own guidance and the FSA's own guidance essentially said up until a few weeks ago that it wasn't novel, so you can't make something novel in reverse. And so essentially a blanket ban would almost certainly be unenforceable, and obviously it brings about around the whole issue around reasonable doubt. And the other side of that is, along with reasonable doubt, you also have to have a reason for issuing that stop notice, and it's almost impossible to say that hemp or hemp extracts have any degree of issue on human health. We've been using hemp and hemp extracts for the past 45,000 years plus. I think our earliest research goes back to about 80,000 years. It's written on a stone wall somewhere in glyphs. So that's where it was. So will there be enforcement? Well, the FSA, who have been talking to us all the way through, we managed to re-establish dialogue late in December, early in January, have always had a very different view with us than they have with any association. And I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe it's because of our dominant position, that our membership, generally speaking, will listen to what we say and take that on board. Whereas other smaller organisations that have gone in there, and some that have written some not very nice letters to them, they generally brush them off with it. No, we're not particularly interested, don't worry about it, we'll make everything right eventually. The important thing about where we were going, and the dates to remember originally, were that CBD was put on the novel list back in October 2013, which means by 2018 it was supposed to have had its full review. In 2014, the way that the novel foods register works was changed, so it gave essentially an extra year, with harmonisation coming into force in 2018. So the review was actually due on October the 20th this year as to the novelty of hemp extracts. Because they've changed the register, that review is now not legally allowed to happen. They've made their decision, but they've made it without stakeholder engagement. They've made it without any engagement whatsoever across any member of the industry or any of the associations or registered stakeholders whatsoever. It was literally made overnight. So as part of what we've done, we've contacted the NAHS, National Association of Health Stores, the Health Food Manufacturers Association, and lots of other associations around what's going on. And on Tuesday, there is actually a meeting of all of those people with regards to whether they support what the CTA is doing. Overall, the general feeling is that we're better to be nearly 30,000 people behind one organisation pushing for this to go forward than it is to be lots of splintered organisations taking this forward and probably not getting quite as much traction, because the problem is they don't understand CBD, they don't understand the whole novel foods issue, and they don't understand what you guys sell. When we first went to Brussels nearly 18 months ago, we had to sit and explain basic extraction. They didn't understand what an extraction was. They didn't understand that when you extract something, you naturally concentrate what is in that. They couldn't grasp what was actually happening. So the first time that we went to Brussels, we presented probably a couple of thousand pages of information. The next time we went to Brussels in conjunction with AYA, we presented another couple of thousand pages of information, and all of that information has been disregarded. It's been thrown on the bin. No one has taken any notice of that whatsoever, which is concerning to say the least, which leads us to believe that the issue isn't actually around novel foods in the first place. The issue is actually around regulation. So when we go to Brussels, when we go to London tomorrow, okay, we're going to talk to the UK FSA about something they asked for. You heard about it a few minutes ago, which is CPD. CPD was dreamed up by FSA and MHRA. We were just tasked with the capability to put it together, and which we did. We made sure from the very start it was an independent organisation. That still stands, and unfortunately, with the change in legislation around drugs laws and cannabis in the UK from around June all the way through till late last year, the authorities just shut down on everyone in the industry. They wouldn't engage with anyone around novel foods. They wouldn't engage with anyone around hemp. They wouldn't engage with anyone around CBD at all. They just stopped. And so essentially what we have is we have a legal argument that says you asked for regulation, which seems to be what the problem is around. And in order to make the whole issue go away, we're going to propose that in association with all the other associations stood behind us, that they accept regulation, which was what they asked for, which was what they helped put together, and that's the way that we're working. But in the meantime, under novel foods now, our advice is that if anyone receives a stop notice, contact the CTA or your association, if you have another association, and put them in touch with us, because the QC that we have working is amongst the top lawyers in Europe, and he says that everything is essentially, I wouldn't say hunky-dory because there is still a knife edge, there is still a lot of work to do, but that stop notice would be unlawful.
Thank you very much, Mike and Damien. We've got time for a couple of questions, and I'm going to limit it to a couple because Mike and Damien are located directly behind the stage area, so you can go and have a more in-depth conversation with them there.
I'm not sure if you're aware that quite a few years ago, lacuma fruit was deemed to be a novelty food, and what the industry did was call it algaroba. I've been selling CBD paste now as a temple incense and CBD isolate as fairy dust. No one's contacted me, but is rebranding, renaming, saying legally this product is not for consumption by the person, a legal definition of a legal fiction, because lawfully they cannot stop us.
That's an interesting one. I remember exactly what you're talking about, because I live in Algarrobo, which is what it was old, or very close to Algarrobo. There is no doubt that individual cannabinoids and the way they are sold is novel. There is absolutely no doubt whatsoever. We didn't have the capability of extracting in isolation until well after 1997. So from a legal point of view, novel foods catalogue and cannabinoids in isolation would be classed as novel. You are not being contacted, not because they don't care, you are not being contacted because you haven't come up on the radar. And you also haven't come up on this. We're on a database which is every single internal trading standards officer and every single food standards officer on an internal database. In this week, we've received 63 phone calls from trading standards and food standards officers asking us what our opinion is and what they are supposed to do. That should give you some idea of why things aren't being done as they are supposed to be being done, but also how things cannot be done. So, in answer to your question is, can they legally stop you? Maybe, unless you're talking about isolates. Can they actually stop you? Not really. They would have trouble.
Thank you very much, Mike and Damien. As I say, they are behind the stage. Any further questions, please go and see them there. If you'd just like to give them a round of applause.
Thank you.